Hey guys, welcome back to a special episode of Tuba Da Vinci Live. This week we're talking about going solar in 2021 and everything you need to know. And I'm joined by my very good friend Sinue from Drone Quote. Hey Sinue, how's it going, man?
Hey there, Ricky. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So if you guys have seen the channel before, you know we've done a lot of work with Drone Quote. When I first met Sinue, I was super excited to hear about how he approaches solar quoting. So they fly a drone, they do all the legwork kind of for you, and they talk to installers in your area and get you multiple quotes without any of the high pressure salespeople or anything else. And I don't even know if you have the number in front of you, but dozens of our viewers have gone solar using Drone Quote. So thank you for being here. We really appreciate you. And I'm hoping to just get into the comments and answer everyone's questions and figure out what people are thinking, what questions they have about solar, what's changed, and take it from there.
Yeah, I'm excited. There's been quite a few developments in the solar industry, especially at the end of last year, with the tax credit being one of the bigger ones. But we'll get into more details as the conversation goes through.
Absolutely. And as always, this video is presented by Jetta, which is one of our partners here. And if you have a Tesla, you're going to love their products. They feel like Tesla made it themselves, really high quality products, good, really cool stuff. So go to getjetta.com. If you use our code TubaDaVinci, you'll save a couple of bucks as well on checkout. They've got really awesome, the newest product they have is the Jetta Tray, which helps you to like charge your watch and AirPods, other wireless stuff as you're driving. So really cool stuff. Definitely check them out. And thank you, Jetta, for sponsoring the show. All right, so I think we can probably jump right into it. And you just mentioned the big thing that I actually am not even 100% sure on, so let's talk about it. What has changed in terms of the tax credit this year? What was the original plan, and what's changed?
Yeah, so the original plan was to decrease the tax credit from 26% in 2020 to 22% in 2021. And then eventually it'll go down to, from 22%, it'll eventually go down to zero for residential tax credits. But that was extended at the end of last year and signed into reality, or I guess law or what have you, when they did the first or the second stimulus back in early January, and that made it concrete for until 2023.
Gotcha. So now, kind of, what is you guys do a lot of solar work, and 2020 was a pretty wild year with COVID-19. So what was your year like last year? By the way, I'm just kind of curious, and I don't think I've actually asked you that.
No, you haven't actually. Well, not in a lot of detail. We did when the pandemic started, happening, and everybody started realizing how serious it was. This was February, March timeframe. That's when everything shut down. We saw a significant drop off in business. It was from one week to the next. Like, people that were ready to go were telling us, "Hey, we're going to hold off," and installers were telling us, "Hey, we anticipate shortages in panels and longer lead times as a result of that." It was a harrowing, couple of weeks for us because, for everybody really, not just us. And I think that an unforeseen result of that is that people were home naturally because they had to be, right? But people started using way more electricity as a result of that, not thinking that would happen. And those people that were telling us they were going to wait started getting their bills, and then they started thinking to themselves, "Hey, I'm going to be working from home more often, or I'm going to be schooling from home." And I think now more than ever, as that my utility bills increased as a result of more hours home, let's look into this with a renewed sense of urgency. It was a pretty wild time though. Wasn't my cup of tea.
Yeah, I can imagine. I do know a lot of people did still go solar, and I think part of it is the uncertainty, the emergency preparedness aspect of it. We just went through that entire craziness in Texas where they had power outages for days at a time in the middle of one of the coldest winters on record. And so I think people are thinking about backup energy. So it's not just like, how do I save money on my bills, which those people might have kind of maybe slowed down in 2020 with everything happening. But there are people who are thinking, just in case something happens, like, I want to be able to still operate the house. Yeah. So
yeah, absolutely.
We'll kind of jump to and fro, I think, because otherwise we're not going to be able to keep track of all the questions. The first question, and I'm going to ask right to you, Jason Stebbins says, first question, 10 cents per kilowatt hour is what he pays with no peak time of use. I'm very jealous of his electricity prices.
For real.
He says, is it worth it to have two power walls or just one?
Well, I would ask if I were on the phone with Jason, I would ask him what his motives are. I would imagine that his motives have something to do along the lines of what we just mentioned. But Jason, I think that, if you're looking to save money, you're going to have the expectation that the savings are going to take over a longer course of time than they would otherwise. For Ricky, for example, where your average cost of power is probably about 32 cents a kilowatt hour, right, Ricky?
Yeah, and come summertime, the 4 to 9 p.m. jumps up to like 58 cents, dude. I'm
Yeah.
not making that up.
No. I know. We get a lot of our customers from the Southern California region, especially San Diego. Thank you, SDG&E, by the way. But Jason, going back to your question, if you have one Powerwall, you're not avoiding any costs, right? You don't have any demand charges, as Ricky just mentioned, and your cost per kilowatt hour is extremely low. So, I mean, unless you have a significant need for backup power in the event of an emergency, I mean, if I were in your shoes, I'd probably, err on the side of caution and go with one battery.
Yeah, if you have like air conditioning or a double oven or some high use utility that they told you one Powerwall can't provide, and you want it, like your total goal is backup power, two Powerwalls will give you 24 kilowatt hours or 26, and it'll cover your usage really well. But it's going to cost you. It'll probably be about $20,000 to do that. So that would be kind of up to you. But as far as it's not going to be a cost saving win because your electricity is just so affordable that it's crazy. And no time of use. That's crazy. It's hard for Californians to imagine, I guess. But yeah, that's really
You know
cool.
what? Let me add something to it's a little technical thing here, but the depth of discharge means that you won't actually get 26 kilowatt hours. You'll probably get somewhere. I want to say it's 11 kilowatts, if I remember correctly. I could be wrong on that number, but you'll have a little bit less than the rated capacity of the battery, just for the sake of the chemistry and keeping the battery functional in the future.
Right. So keeping in this vein right now, how Tesla announced their solar pricing, and I believe it was with the tax credit of $1.49 per watt, right? Let's talk a little bit about Tesla. How do you feel their prices are, and what have people been saying about going with Tesla for solar versus other companies and other installers? Because there are still tons of other companies that do solar.
There are, yeah. So I appreciate you bringing that up early on in the conversation. I like to do that when our salespeople speak with homeowners. We bring it up early on because it's important to understand what somebody feels about Tesla or how they feel about it, or what they plan on installing and why. I mean, they're the elephant in the room, right? And Tesla's pricing is absolutely the lowest possible price you could find in the market. What I tell people when they're buying solar is that the same panels that Tesla is installing are the same panels that any other installer is installing. And right now, or as of late, it was the Q-Cell 340, the black on black Q-Cell 340. Great panel, by the way. I love it. I would install it in my own home. The thing is that when you choose an installer, you're choosing an installer to do the work and who you will hold accountable in the future in the event of there being some unforeseen blank, right? And you want to be able to call that installer and have somebody pick up the phone and not treat you like a number, and or even pick up the phone. So what that means for you is that a company like Tesla, being as big as they are, the likelihood that you're going to get the kind of service that you would get from your local company is low. You're going to get a different level of service, and you're at the whims of what the company's doing at the time, where they're focusing their energy, what they're trying to do with their business, rather than a local installer that is focused solely on solar. So I tell people, worry about the components. They're important, but understand that when you're buying solar, you're buying a relationship with the company that's installing it, because the company that manufactured the panels will honor their warranty, but there's got to be somebody going out there first to do the warranty inspection or functionality test to make sure that the system's still under warranty, and that's who you want to treat you with the level of service that you want to be treated with.
Yeah.
So I speak to that to homeowners often.
Yeah. I get emails from a lot of people who've gone all the different various routes. So I have a pretty interesting perspective on this. I will say some people have had a fantastic experience with Tesla and they've had no issues at all. I think the thing is Tesla is growing at such an incredible speed. Like they're going from a car company to a nationwide solar installer. And think about what that means as far as like training people and like infrastructure and the service crews and all of it. So there's going to be some growing pains early on, I think. And you have to potentially, like if you're living in a city, like if you live in San Diego, odds are Tesla has tons of people and they've been doing it for a long time. But if you're in a new market that they're just entering, there might be some hiccups and stuff. Thank you, Eric Kessler, for the super chat, and thank you for becoming an even more valued member of the YouTube channel partnership program. So, Eric is my personal hero. He's one of our awesome supporters. So, I will say though, here's one thing to think about when you go with a big company like Tesla is, I think I told you this, my solar panels, by the way, are turning 10 years old. My first 5 solar panels I bought turned 10 in June of this year. So first of all, I want to make a video and talk about that. I think it's just super cool. In 10 years, I've gone to 2 refrigerators, 3 cars, 5 laptops, like 10 cell phones, right? But my solar panels are just up there, just rocking away. Never had an issue. Part of why I want to make this video and why I love it so much is people do not understand how durable a solar panel is.
Absolutely.
But I will say this. My company that installed it was this company called All Seasons Roofing and Solar or something. It was out of business. So if something did go wrong, I couldn't call on them, okay? Number 2, the panels are made by a company called Silicon, if you remember back in the day. It was like SILIKEN. Out of business. So if something were to happen, I'm SOL because I cannot call the panel maker or the installer. Now, when people talk about, I have a 30-year warranty with solar, that sounds good. But if you really, if it like 10 years go by, and 10 years, man, I'll tell you, 10 years of my life have gone by very quickly. When that happens, will the installer be there to honor their warranty? That's where I think you gotta kind of weigh the pros and cons. And solar is really cutthroat and competitive, and I think the next 10 years is going to be even more so. So there's going to be like consolidation and stuff. You have to weigh all that out. It's like the price today, it's the service today, it's the longevity. And so that's where, like, if you were curious about something, email someone like Senue and ask them, hey, I want to get panels that, like Ricky said, I don't want to have that problem where 10 years from now they're out of business. So which ones do you recommend? Like, I would go like if you got LG panels, I'm pretty sure LG is going to be around in 30 years. So,
yeah, I would say the same thing about LG. I mentioned QCell a moment ago. QCell is a wonderful manufacturer of panels. There's SunPower, although SunPower had a little bit of a change in their business model where they went from being a panel manufacturer to now being a sales company that sells SunPower panels. There's a boutique installer. Maybe they don't like that I just said that, but Solaria is a wonderful installer. They're a little bit on the smaller side, and it'll lend itself, an installer like that. I'm sorry, not installer. I meant to say manufacturer. A manufacturer like that will lend itself to the liability that they may not be around 10 years from now, as Ricky just mentioned. So I really like to stick to the bigger companies, and sometimes these bigger companies, to the everyday person out there looking for solar, are companies they've never heard of, because it's not like you're looking for solar on a regular basis. Everybody knows their iPhone, right? Everybody knows LG and so on and so on. But these companies like Jinko and Canadian Solar and QCell, for that matter, are huge companies that make excellent products. They're just not a name brand because we don't look for solar on a daily basis.
Part of it too is like you could never 100% guarantee anything. Like you never know how the which companies will win out and how things will change and stuff. So yeah, part of it is, and this is true for anything, right? If you buy a refrigerator and it has a 10-year warranty, who's to say that company's still around? So these are the interesting kinds of questions that I think come up. So I wanted to ask you a question that Eric Kessler asked. He says, my next home will be hybrid, off-grid, with Tesla solar roof for the aesthetics, power walls. He says, what must be designed in to be able to survive like a Texas-sized 2 to 3 week or longer utility outage?
Well, I mean, in terms of surviving some kind of outage like that, you have to design in the capacity for what you're installing in your home. So, are you installing a hot tub, a huge refrigerator? You have you probably won't charge your electric vehicle with your power wall, but any other high energy use appliances or electronics, you'll have to factor for how many kilowatt hours you plan on using on a daily basis, and what that would look like if you had no power coming in from the infrastructure of the utility, right? So how much power are you storing in your batteries, or battery if it's singular, and how are you going to divvy that up along the appliances or the breakers that are going to be fed by those batteries? So it's just a matter of sitting down with your home builder if you're building a new home and discussing, what your plans for the home are and what you would like to have in the event of an emergency.
Yeah, I talked a little bit about this on our vice versa show. But with what happened in Texas, I think it shows you the importance of having like a lot of options. For example, I'm a fan of having natural gas running to homes. Not big. I mean, not. I don't use it a whole lot, but I have it. So if something were to happen, I have natural gas. And the reason why that's so cool is, if you have a power wall to run a little 500-watt blower, my power wall could run a blower for like 20 hours. I could use natural gas and heat my house. Whereas if you don't have a power wall, you don't have electricity, then even with natural gas, you couldn't do anything unless you had like a natural gas fireplace, which would help in some areas. But I mean, the first thing I think is just try to make a house resilient, have a lot of backup options out there. And the second thing is the minute you have any kind of an emergency situation, you got to kind of retune the way you think. You got to go into like a low power mode, shut down, turn off breakers, like shut down anything you don't absolutely need. Maybe your whole family kind of moves into one or two rooms and you kind of heat those rooms only. Everyone watched TV together. Just do whatever you can to like lower your utility usage. Also, Eric, I'm curious when Eric is gonna have to send me a message when he gets his solar glass roof. Wildly jealous. I love that thing. It's one of those products I wish my house. It just doesn't make sense for me because I have a new roof. Even as like snow is accumulating, if the sun is out, it'll just kind of melt it off as it goes, compared to like more of an insulative thing like a tile roof. So for that reason, your roof will shed the snow better. But the first thing to do is get up and make sure the roof is clear, because you want to collect as much sun as possible. And on a cold winter day, you're not going to get that much. Maybe it's kind of more kind of lower in the sky sun. That's
Right.
not quite ideal. But just collect as much as you can to charge your power walls, lower your usage. I actually kind of want to do a video where I do like a 1 week challenge, and I say like I'm going to try to live off my power wall for a week. My wife said do it when the sun is when like we're more of the sunny weather, because I cloudy days really do make it much more difficult. So yeah,
That would be actually, that's a really good idea. That would be a really interesting video.
and so going with the solar glass roof or any kind of solar, first and foremost, keep them clear, especially when the temperatures are cold and there's potentially snow and stuff. That way you get as much collection as possible. Charge your batteries, lower your usage, and try to just endure. Exactly. So Senor, tell me a little bit about what are the questions that you get? What are like the top 2 or 3 questions that you get asked most from people who are trying to go solar?
I think one of the top questions I get is the inverter, the kind of inverter that's being selected. And there's a lot of hype around different kinds of inverters, right? And really, the panel type and or the method of acquisition if it's not cash. If it's a cash purchase, it's very straightforward. Those are very, I don't want to say easy, but they're a lot less complicated. If you have a finance option versus a PPA or power purchase agreement, people go back and forth between what's better versus a purchase with finance or a PPA. It really depends on the individual what is going to be better, whether it's the panel, the inverter, or the method of acquisition. And I think that the reason why the inverter question is so common is because for the most part there's really only, there are more than two, but the more common inverters in the industry are SolarEdge and Enphase. And Ricky, as long as you've known me, you've heard me talk about those. So excuse me, those two options. So I think that being the case, people that are more technical will dig more into those two options and have a lot of questions behind them. And then there's also like I mentioned, the panel question, which depending on the company that you're talking to, if it's not Tesla, a lot of solar companies will stick to one solar panel manufacturer over another. And they do this for various reasons. Usually it's because if I buy more of one kind, I get a better price in greater numbers, right? So the panel type and the inverter are very common questions, like I mentioned. The method of acquisition, I prefer to suggest to people that they purchase their system, whether it's a financed option or a cash option, just because it removes so many of the strings that are attached to anything that's power purchase agreement type of acquisition. So yeah, those three questions are very common amongst our clientele.
Yeah, my brother recently just bought a house, and the house that he bought had a lease agreement solar with it, and it added like I think 2 weeks to the escrow, and what it came down to is if you and I'm not saying it's a bad option. If you have a house and you're really not in a position to be buying solar and getting a lease, which means now you have solar and you're making green energy and saving some money, never a bad idea if that's the way you want to go. But one thing to keep in mind is it does add like a lien to your property. So this company, the house that he was buying, this company had a lien against it, saying, "Hey, we own property on your roof."
On your
And
property.
so when it came time to selling the house, they had to square up that contract, saying, "Hey, what are you going to do? Are you going to pay us out? Or what do how are you going to take care of that?" So my brother and the selling person had to like negotiate that into the contract, and it added 2 weeks to the
Yeah.
escrow. It's not
You know,
impossible. It's not, but it is something to consider, that there's a lien on your property, which I'm not a fan of that.
yeah. One thing that I'll share with you regarding the PPA, the power purchase agreement, and the purchase, whether it's, well, in this case, in this example, a finance purchase, the reason why a PPA is nice is because you don't have to worry about the complexities of the tax credit, right? But nowadays, PPAs are 25 years long for the most part. So you bind yourself to a 25-year commitment that usually has an escalator of 2.9%. So you start at a low 17, 18 cents a kilowatt hour, and then every year it goes up 3%. And it's a compounding 3%, by the way. In my book, that's not a good deal. Now, granted,
Yeah.
I'm only one man. In my opinion, a purchase option financed over 20 years that's built for you to keep the tax credit as opposed to applying it to the principal to bring down your monthly payment will be far more attractive without having to commit yourself for 25 years. You're committing for 20 years, so still a long period of time. However, the buyout clause is so much simpler. You have the remaining principal, and that's it. No prepayment penalty. And you still have 15 cents per kilowatt hour without there being any escalators. So now, granted, everything I just said would lead you to believe that I am biased towards a purchase option, and I am. So for a lot of those reasons.
Yeah. But when you talk to a company, bring up those questions and get all the numbers in front of you. That's what I always say. Like, first and foremost, have the numbers, that way you can make your decision. So okay, that's good. Somebody in the live chat, named Junker ZN, mentioned he has panels that are 15 years old and they're still
Ooh,
working
what kind of
just
panels
fine.
are they?
Yeah, I'm curious. Junker, if you can let us know what kind of panels they were, I'm really curious as well. But the fact is, my panels were silicon, which is some kind of startup company, I guess. And 10 years later, they still look fine, and they're still performing really well. And interestingly as well, once you have like the roof mounting, that's the hard part to me.
Yep.
I don't know if I told you, but the panels that you helped us install last year, I upgraded them to 350 watt panels this year. I did it in a day. I went up there, undid the screws, took each panel down. I mean, I'm not trying to make it sound like it's easy. These are pretty heavy, and I have
Yeah.
Juan help me. But yeah, I took all 12 down, and I swapped them in with higher panels, and they're making like 30% more electricity than they did before, which is kind of cool. And it took me like a day to do. The hard part really is on the roof. So even if something did happen to your solar panel itself, it's not the end of the world. Really, it's pretty cost effective to be able to change that. I mean, if you have like a 10-story building or something, that might be different, but you get my point.
You know what? Actually, that's a really good point that you're making right now. I want to pause there for a moment and elaborate, if I may. Oftentimes, people will tell me, ask, what's it like if I want to add panels? Can I just buy like 15 panels now and then add 2 more in the future? And I'm going to take your point that you made and include it into what I'm saying here, because it is easy to add 2 panels to any house, right? I think you added 10 panels in 2020, 12. And it was easy done in the sense that, easily done in the sense that your roof was very simple to work with. But oftentimes I tell people, 5 years from now, instead of adding 2 more panels to meet your needs of what you're using 2 years from now, replace X amount of panels with higher wattage panels, which is going to be far less complicated. You don't have to make additional penetrations into the roof. You could typically use the existing infrastructure that was installed with the previous system, and it'll cost you less. And you could even do it yourself in most cases, assuming it's not a dangerous roof. Really good point you brought up.
There's complexities there. I'm not recommending you guys do anything you're not comfortable doing, but exactly. That's what I recently did, and I didn't really make a video about it, but it's fascinating to watch how much production I'm making. So I'm almost June will be my best months in terms of production, but I have about a 5 kilowatt system, and right now, yesterday I made 35 kilowatt hours, which is like a record high for me, and I think by June I'm hoping to break 40. And I actually have a few more panels that I actually potentially looked at getting installed. I just haven't had time yet, but there's something about solar for me that's just wildly fascinating. I've always said this. It's not really, even 10 years ago when I first met with my installer, they were like, "Oh, show me your bill," because they're trying to sell you. They're trying to show you like, here's the savings. They saw my bill. Back then, I was a bachelor. I was living by myself. It didn't really, San Diego doesn't get very hot. It doesn't get very cold. My bill was really cheap to begin with, and he goes, "Oh wow, your bill is so low. Probably not worth it." I was like, no, I want solar, like, to be able to do this today. I wanted solar so I could talk about it 10 years later and figure out, like, what goes into it. Do you need to clean them? All this stuff. Are they long lasting? Is there any maintenance? And I have all the answers, like zero. My panels will cost me zero in 10 years. And I get up personally and clean them like once or twice a year. Even that you don't have to. The rains
Yeah.
come and stuff, and you don't have to really worry too much about it. But yeah, they are a wildly fascinating thing. And I have this little meter on my wall that I watch. It's an iPad, and it shows me my generation. And so now that I have a Powerwall, what it does is it charges during the day, and then as soon as my Powerwall is topped off, then it exports it to the grid, and you can kind of see that happen in real time. But I'm pretty much at 100%. I'm offsetting my entire day, and I have my Powerwall programmed to only discharge during the really expensive period from 4 to 9 p.m.
Yeah.
So it charges up, and then it sits idly by, and then from 4 to 9 p.m., like as far as my utility company is concerned, like I'm not in the house because my usage is zero. It just
That's
completely
awesome.
covers my house. Yeah.
Yeah. The Powerwall comes in really handy when you have demand charges,
Yeah.
or you have a time of use rate, because you could avoid those higher utility rates that they're gonna beat you down with, and they're high, man. We were just talking about it in California or in San Diego. It is in the 50 cents you said earlier.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. I was just reading the comments. So Rui asked, do the old panels get a second life? The panels that I put in last year, I experimented with some used panels. Absolutely. Used panels, the really weird thing too, even after 30 years, my prediction is that they're going to produce 80 or 70% of what they used to when they were new, but you could put them somewhere and still continue to use them. But really, imagine how much cheaper they're going to be in 30 years, right?
Oh,
So
absolutely.
so I think what's going to end up happening is, like, if you've got huge amounts of land, just throw in more panels and make more electricity. But really, the key will have to be that our storage can keep up. One thing I've
Mhm.
mentioned to you in the past is we here in California, like around high noon, we make so much solar power that we actually curtail it, which is just waste the solar generation because there's nowhere to put it. Grids are
Right.
very much like just in time. Whatever power is needed right now, that's what is needed. And when you have all these houses with solar at high noon, there's no demand for it, and so that energy is literally wasted. So people who are getting solar today have to remember is, if you live in a place where there's a lot of people with solar, you really should try to store that into a battery and eventually have it. I think solar was really big in the last 10 years. I think 2021 to 2031 is going to be the decade of battery storage. If all of us could have more battery storage, that's how we really help, like, clean up the grid.
Yeah, and you know what? Let me add to that a little bit by saying that as the number of people installing solar has increased, and 2019 was a very strong year. 2020 was a strong year as well, even though the pandemic hit at the end of 2020. There was a significant surge as people were trying to capture the tax credit before these news of the tax credit being extended came out. But to your point of a lot of people having solar and not too many people having batteries, I want everybody to know that adding a battery to a solar system is extremely easy. We do it on an almost regular basis where somebody's calling us, asking us to put together a battery quote for them and then take it all the way to installation. Ricky, you installed the battery long after your system was installed originally. So it's just a matter of, finding the right equipment out there, because there are different options other than Tesla. There's LG Chem. They're coming out with a 16 kilowatt hour battery. There's
Oh, really?
Generac. Yeah, it's actually our mutual friend. Oh my goodness, lives in Texas.
Robert?
Robert, thank you. He was mentioning that to me the other day about acquiring one for his home. But they're coming out with that battery later this year. And then there's a Generac, the generator manufacturer. They they manufacture batteries as well. They have a 22 kilowatt hour battery capacity. And there's a few others out there. And, we're talking right now about lithium ion batteries, but there's also lithium phosphate batteries, which have a greater depth of discharge, and they're a lot more stable in the
Right.
chemistry, and they last longer. They're a little bit bigger, but, you put it in your garage and you hide it somewhere. So there's a lot of technology that's being deployed and advanced as we speak. So I think that, as you mentioned earlier, 10 years from now, if we all, not all, but as many people as possible adopt energy storage, it will definitely curtail the amount of other forms of electricity that are being generated and moved around, because the energy is already stored in people's homes.
Yeah, that's the first best step you can take. And lithium iron phosphate is wildly exciting to me because unlike lithium, like the more high energy density, when you need more advanced, really like hardcore chemistries, you need things like nickel and manganese and other more rare earth metals. Lithium iron phosphate, wildly abundant, very,
Yep.
very economically, very eco-friendly. And yeah, some of these battery systems have 3 to 4 thousand cycle lives, which means you could use your system forever. And if you keep it within the sweet spot, it might even be further than that. It might be like a 20-year house battery. And if in your house, like you mentioned, the size doesn't really matter all that much. I had a really good question I wanted to tackle from Ian Sears, who says solar trackers on pole mounts versus fixed ground mount and roof mount, cost and effectiveness. So the cheapest is probably ground mount, right? I'm actually not a huge fan of ground mount because I think like the Earth should be used for something.
Yeah.
There's no greater feeling for me than having a solar on a roof because you're literally not there's no compromise to it.
Yep.
In fact, you're keeping your house cooler by not having that radiant sun energy hit your roof and heat up your attic. So
That's right.
that's my favorite way to do it. And what's really crazy is 10, 15 years ago, I remember when I first got my system, my prices were over 3.5, almost 4 times more expensive than they are today. So at
Yep.
that point, a tracking system might have been beneficial, but today solar panels are so cheap. Just buy more solar panels and stick them down. There's no maintenance. You don't have to grease bearings and all the kind of mechanical complexities of a tracking mount system. I think as solar gets cheaper, there's just no need for it. You're far better off just put some panels south facing, put a couple west face. Like you could just have them static, and they're so cheap that it's probably better long term than having moving parts.
Well, I've installed not too many, a handful of tracking systems, and the concept of a tracking system is actually really cool because you increase your efficiency of whatever kind of panel you're talking about by about 30 to 40%. Now, that comes at a cost, and that cost can sometimes be that if you are moving your system and it gets stuck in a certain way that's not optimal, you just missed out on half of the day potentially in terms of production. Not to mention the issue with moving parts, as you mentioned. The tracking system, the last tracking system I installed was several years ago. Our partners right now don't do tracking systems, but I want to say it was in 2015, 2016. And I found out last year that that tracking system was eventually decommissioned because there was a lot of issues with the motorized elements.
Yeah, I don't think people will even make them in a couple of years. The economics don't make sense anymore. When a panel cost $2,000, it made a lot of sense. But when they cost $100 or $200 like they do now, I
Mm-hmm.
just don't think you could use them and for it to make sense. So you mentioned that there's a couple of other battery providers. That's really exciting. Do you have any pricing on the LG Chem battery?
No, I haven't had any partners release it yet. The LG Cam battery, the previous one, the Resu, I want to say it was a 10 kilowatt hour battery. It was marginally less expensive than the Tesla Powerwall, and it didn't have the software features that Tesla has. So it wasn't as popular as a result of the capacity and the cost, and not to mention the software behind Tesla's Powerwall. I mean, I got to give it to Tesla. Their software is just immaculate. It's wonderful. But I don't have any pricing to answer your question.
Got it. Yeah, the integration with Tesla is fantastic. All their little charting and graphing is really nice. And when you install a Powerwall, you get a gateway, and they'll put leads on your main breaker and your solar part, and so you'll get a full breakdown of like what are you pulling from the grid, what's your solar doing, what's your battery doing, and you can lay them all over each other. It's just wildly, again, just if you're a nerd and you love this kind of data, it's just really fun. Like every night I open my app and I go, all right, how's my generation today? And that's why I knew how much I made yesterday, is because I'm tracking it. If
Well,
you just want to save money and you don't care, that's a different reason to get it. But
well, I will mention you just brought up a point. The leads, they're called CT. Geez, I just stumped myself here. There are these leads that go around the cables at your service panel, and as you mentioned, they measure the electricity coming in and out of your home. You don't have to install a Tesla Powerwall to have those. There's a product that I've seen people install, and it's a great product, and it gives you this kind of data even if you don't have solar. It's called Sense, Home Sense, if I'm not mistaken, and it'll give you very
Yeah,
similar data down to the
really cool
signature.
product.
Yeah, down to the signature of like your fridge going on or turning off, and it recognizes those things with their own electric signature, and it'll tell you what is turning on in your home and how much electricity it's using in real time. So for those people out there that, you know, potentially solar may not be a good fit, or they don't have the roof space or what have you, Sense is a great product. And by the way, nobody told us to mention anything about Sense. It's just perfect opportunity to bring it up because it is a great product.
Yeah, I know some people who have it. I've thought about getting it. I have a more custom system that being a developer, I have all this like Python and stuff running. So I went with a different system, but their product is really cool. I think it's about $400.
Yep.
And what's really cool about it is, yeah, the install is pretty simple. You go to your breaker and you install the leads, and then it'll actually take a couple of days and just monitor. So what they found is different things they turn on have different like signatures, like you mentioned. Like for example, your dishwasher turns on, that has like this in it. It may be a little spike from a motor that runs the thing, or maybe your washing machine has a signature, or when your refrigerator kicks in, and it'll start to track it, and then you kind of give it a little bit of input, like it'll go, "Hey, what just happened? Was that this?" And you go, "Yeah, I did just run the washing machine." They go, "Got it. That's the washing machine." And they can actually track all your devices without anything else, just AI, like machine learning. Really cool stuff.
Yep.
And the whole point there is to just look at your usage and try to lower it. Like, hey, 4 to 9 p.m., do I need to be running my dishwasher right now? What if I just said, run it at 10 o'clock and didn't run it at this time? So those are the kinds of things you can do to like lower your bill. And I've always been pretty aggressive about lowering my, I have all LED light bulbs in my house. I have for years, stuff like that. So even if you can't get solar, if you can't do batteries, there's always fun things you can do to try to save.
Well, Captain Planet would always say reduce, reuse, recycle, right?
Yeah.
Well, in this case, if you reduce the amount of electricity that your home is using, that's where I always tell people, start there. If you can reduce the amount of electricity that your home is using, you're going to reduce the number of panels that you need to buy, thereby reducing the cost, right? So, common things that people could look at in most homes are air conditioning units. Are they being tuned up? Are they being maintained so that they're not running inefficiently? Is your pool pump a variable speed pool pump versus a single speed pool pump? How are you heating in the house? If you're heating with electricity with space heaters versus natural gas, you're going to use a lot less electricity to heat with natural gas than you would with electricity. So there's different ways that you can go about reducing the usage of electricity, thereby reducing your bill, or thereby reducing how much you spend on solar.
Yeah, well said.
And you know what? We tell people these things, even though for everybody watching that knows anything about Drone Quote, we don't sell anybody's information. We don't sell anything other than, we don't sell anything. We help people make buying decisions about solar. So our job is to help educate the consumer so that they know exactly what they're getting and why they're getting it. And beforehand, let's figure out what we could do to reduce the size of the system, because that's in your best interest. And if your best interests are covered, then Drone Quote's doing our job.
Yeah, exactly. One of, as I mentioned, dozens of my viewers have gone with Drone Quote. One of them wrote me, I don't know if I told you this, one of my viewers wrote me recently, and they said what they're going to do is they got a big system installed last year, and with the tax return that they're going to get this year, right? It was 26% last year. So with that tax return, they're going to use that to get the battery this year. So they're going to do like a Powerwall with the money that they got back. So that's the thing I always think is these are expensive stuff. Like I've spent a lot of money on solar. I've spent money on Powerwalls, but it doesn't have to all be right now. You can spend it out. You could spread it out and say, look, I'm gonna do this today. I'm gonna add this later. There was a question earlier. Again, it was from Ian. He says, I think his question was, let me just pull it up here. He asked if you could add to us a Tesla system. So if we have a Tesla solar roof with Powerwalls, can I bring your own additional array of panels be added? So if you have the solar glass roof, like the roof tiles with built-in solar, you don't want to go stick on solar panels to that. No. That'd be crazy. What you could do is you can call them and say, hey, when I got this installed, I only needed this much generation. So, some of these tiles were dummy tiles. Could you come back now? I want more generation, and they can take out dummy tiles that don't produce and replace them with panels that do. Or if you get a normal Tesla solar installation, like solar panels on top of your roof, of course you can add to it. They use a string inverter, right? So I don't know if you can, there might be some like series and parallel considerations as far as like, could they add them to the same circuit, or would they have to like run a new line back to the circuit breaker? But it might vary on your situation, right?
Yeah, and in most Tesla installations that we've seen, they use SolarEdge. So SolarEdge, as long as you have the capacity in that inverter, you could typically add to it, or if the orientation of your roof is such that you're producing half of your power in the morning and half of your power in the evening from an east-west orientation, then that'll buy you some flexibility as well. But you also have to have the roof space available for it, right? And or the roof space that is not going to be compromised by shade or space constraints.
Ian also makes a really great point. He says, 53 likes and 123 watching, ? I agree. So let's try to get those, let's get those likes up. We'd appreciate that. All right. One thing people are asking is about, I don't know where the end of the world conversations kind of started, but apparently Isaac Newton predicted it'll be 2060. The Mayans at 2012. I think they were off by a couple of years there. Yeah, so Matthew Schmitz asks, when will solar panels get more efficient than the low 20% area? So I'll take this one. This is interesting. You can kind of tell where there's challenges in like engineering and scientific breakthroughs when you see these like perceived walls, if you will, right? Like for example, when will the internal combustion engine, the gas car, get more than 35% efficient? The answer is basically it's never going to happen. It's not possible. We've been trying to make them more efficient for years, and we're still maybe in the 40s at this point. But that means like 60% of all the gas you burn in your gas car is just wasted as heat and noise and stuff. So there's fundamental like physics kind of limitations, if you will. Here, I think we're going to need like a fundamental breakthrough in solar production to break beyond like the 25-30 barrier. So right now we have this photovoltaic system, and based on how we are currently doing it, I don't see us breaking beyond 30% unless there's like some step change in the technology. But the thing is, as it gets cheaper, it doesn't really matter because the sun is blasting enough solar energy that even at 20% efficient, it's totally fine. If the panels are cheap enough and you can cover your roof in it, you keep your roof cooler, you keep your house cooler, and you'll still be just fine. My 12 panels, which doesn't even occupy, let's say, a 20% of my roof, not even 20% of my roof, produces 40 kilowatt hours a day. That's incredible. So keep that in mind.
And also, I mean, your viewers don't know this, but there's a little bit of shade consideration for your property, and you're still producing the amount of power you're producing.
Yeah. So that's, I haven't seen any questions about shade. I kind of thought there would be. Shade is solar's worst nightmare. You don't want any shade. And I actually have a lot of trees on my property, just everywhere. And one thing with solar to remember is that the angle where the sun is in the sky is really kind of overhead in summertime. Like the sun is very high in the sky, and it goes lower and lower in the horizon on the shortest day of the year, like December 21st, it's really low in the sky. So when that is the case, there's more likelihood for shade because a tree that didn't seem that tall before, suddenly now it's going to cast shadows. And so you're going to have the worst shade between September and March, and you'll have the lowest amount of shade, So all that kind of factors in. But when you get a quote from someone like Drone Quote, you guys factor that in. You guys take a look at the trees, and you'll know like what to recommend. Because if you have a lot of shading, you definitely want to do something like power optimizers for a string inverter. Or honestly, I've always preferred microinverters for that reason. Although if you're feeding it into a battery, maybe you want to keep it as a string inverter because you can just go DC to DC. In my system right now, I actually go DC from the panels, my microinverters make it AC, and then it has to go back to DC to charge my Powerwall. So not the most efficient. But shade is something you have to work in. And they actually make panels now. They're pretty expensive still. They make panels where even on the panel level, shade isn't a problem. Like if you have some shade in the bottom of the panel, it doesn't hurt the top of the panel. All this is because the way they're wired up in parallel means that any drop off on one cell is going to have a chain reaction effect on others. But nothing
Yeah, and if
you
I could
can't
just
work out.
simplify the whole concept of shade for people, I know that sounds maybe silly to say, but if you could think of your solar panel electricity generation as moving water, right? If you block the flow of water in one, section of the plumbing, the other end of the plumbing where water would have been coming out is no longer receiving, a current of water. So what Ricky just mentioned with these, higher efficiency panels, they're able to flow the electricity in a manner that doesn't inhibit the electricity generation when half of the panel is being shaded by, I don't know, a tree or a structure of your home, chimney or what have you. So there are a lot of improvements there. But as you mentioned, also you pay for that, right? And you can mitigate it on a bigger level at a lower cost with microinverters or with power optimizers from SolarEdge. And if you have the space available, then you can make up the fact that some of your panels are going to be shaded by adding a few more panels and going to lower cost panels like Hanwha or that's QCell, by the way, or a Canadian Solar will allow you to make up that difference because you're not spending an arm and a leg on buying something like SunPower or Panasonic, which are great panels. It's just that you're paying more for them. And if they're going to be shaded, why pay more for them if they're going to be in the shade? If you
Yeah.
have the space available, that is.
Yeah. And that I actually quickly realized you mentioned when you talk about like picking the kind of solar panels you want to use, it's really kind of a question of how big is your house and your roof. If you have a massive ranch style house where you have like hundreds and hundreds of square feet of roof space available, then you don't really have to get the most efficient. You can really try to just optimize on the price part of it. But if you have like a 2-story house and the actual roof is pretty small, especially the south facing part, you don't want to have panels on the north facing part if you're in the northern hemisphere. The sun is on the other side. Then you want to go as efficient as you can because you don't want to have to deal with the fact that you only have a certain amount of space. But when you get quotes and stuff from any company, they're going to walk you through the bill, how much you're currently paying, how your roof is looking, and give you considerations for that.
I want to add a point there because it's a real thorn in my side, unfortunately, when our sales associates speak with homeowners who had a quote from. It's usually the national companies or sales reps that are being less than ethical. If there is space on anything south, that's the best space to land on if you're in the northern hemisphere, as you mentioned. If you're on the west side, that's also really good because you're producing later into the day when time of use rates in some cases have gone up, or you're more likely to see demand charges. East is great because your panels aren't there on the cooler side of the roof when the sun's coming up, but you're also producing electricity when it may not be worth as much. Now, what really gets me is when you have these companies that are placing panels on the north side, as you mentioned, and there's a lot of roof space available on other surface areas of the roof.
Yeah.
And we come in and we make a suggestion for, 8 or 5 or however many less panels than this other company. And the homeowner immediately is saying, well, why are you suggesting less panels? The other company is suggesting, all these panels. And we look at their quotes and the panels are on the north side of the roof. And there's space still on other surfaces of the roof, but they're still using the north side. That is a way by which you can increase the size of the system, thereby increasing the salesperson's commission, right? I can't stand when I see that because it's really doing the homeowner a disservice. So if you're anybody watching this, if you're planning on installing solar, do what you can to stay away from the north side of the roof if possible. And if somebody's placing panels on the north side, ask them why and ask them what that's going to do to the efficiency relative to other sections of your roof.
Unless you live in Australia, in which case, do that. Get them on the north side.
Yes. Well, that's the southern hemisphere. So to
Right.
your point, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
most people that we
Australia.
talk with are in the northern hemisphere. Exactly. Yeah. I've seen a neighbor. The way my house is actually perfect for solar because if you walk by the house, you can't even see my panels. They're all on the south side on the back. So looking at the front of the house, you can't even tell. So my house is pretty much perfect. But there's a neighbor that has them on the front of the house, and they have like these like huge risers and metal pole. It's just the most
they're
bizarre.
Tilting them up.
Yeah, and they're tilting them up.
Right? Yeah.
At first I thought it might be because of shading from trees, but honestly, when I look back there, you could easily top off some of the trees, and it would be a non-factor, and it would be kind of stealth and blended in instead of this ridiculously crazy than that they have now. But these are the kinds of things that matter. Don't get stuck on, I have this many panels and they're this and that. Look at your numbers, because that's where the real end point is. If you have tons of shade and you don't have microinverters, or you don't have a good system for that, or you have them on the wrong side, they're not going to really help you very much. While we're talking about this, by the way, one thing I would recommend, at least you think about and talk to your installers about, think about putting panels on the west-facing part of your roof. And the reason why I say that is because currently, like I mentioned, especially in California and places where there's a lot of solar, we have so much generation that we're wasting electricity. We're throwing it out. What we need is electricity later in the day. So if I don't really have a west-facing roof, as you know. That's why I would have done it already. But on the west-facing roof, all day, 2, 3 in the afternoon, not much is happening. But suddenly, as the sun is setting, it starts hitting these panels. And so now you're making electricity from 3, 4, 5, 6 p.m., and that is when we need electricity. That electricity would not get curtailed. That's when people are coming home, running their air conditioning. And so west-facing and south-facing are the two. I wouldn't worry about east-facing. Like in the early morning, people aren't really using electricity. It's not hot yet. It's not, So west and south, if you're the northern hemisphere, is the best way to go.
That electricity on the east side is just, in most cases, it's not worth as much money as your south or west-facing electricity during the latter part of the day. Actually, we're talking about net metering right now. To those of you that don't know, the reason why we are describing some roof faces over others is because the value of electricity in some utilities changes during the time of the day, right? Based on, demand and the time. So I want to bring up Texas. You brought up Texas earlier. When these outages happened a few weeks ago, we saw a significant increase in our traffic from Texas, and a lot of people wanting to install solar in Texas. I got to say that the biggest challenge that we've had with Texas is that it's a deregulated utility state. And what that means is that I could buy my electricity from ABC Electricity, XYZ Electricity, and so on and so on. And what that also means is that these entities are able to form their own rules for net energy metering, which is another way of saying, you give me electricity, I store it for you in the grid, and then when you use it, I give it back to you. And I also don't charge you for it. I charge the credit that we gave you earlier, right? So a lot of these utilities don't have net energy metering, or if they do have it, it's paltry rates where you were paying, 11, 14 cents per kilowatt hour to the utility, but they're giving you 2, 3 cents per unit of electricity.
Right.
So it makes it difficult in some cases to install solar for that reason. Or we've had customers in Texas as well where they installed solar and then the utility pulled the net metering agreement. And that's a really tough position for us to be in because we helped them install the system, but even worse for the homeowner because they're the ones that paid for it. And now the utility said, hey, that net metering agreement that we had, it's no longer available. And you're now stuck with a system that's producing power and you're getting, pennies on the dollar for that utility, for that electricity. And that's where a battery would come in very handy.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about this. People have told me, and you can probably chime in here, people in Florida have said that it is illegal to be off grid. Like you can't just say, you know what, I'm not paying anymore. I'm going to make my own power. I have my own batteries. Screw you. I'm out of here. That's illegal, which is bizarre. I don't understand how you could make it illegal to not use a service. But anyway, let's talk about the different approaches of how solar work. And this is really important because we don't have the batteries. If we had batteries, this is not a conversation we even need to have because you make power, you store it, you use it later. The utility doesn't even know you exist, basically. They're like, oh, he's on vacation because he's not using any power. But when you don't have a battery, you got to give it to the grid. So now it's up to the grid to tell you how they feel about you doing that. I've already told you in California, there's points in the day, and you got to feel for the grid operator because at noon, there's points in the day when they're throwing away electricity because there's so many people with solar making electricity that they don't need. And then they have to give you a credit for this. So that's the debate. What I have, because I got solar 10 years ago, is I have a very favorable net energy metering plan. And how it works is if I give them a kilowatt at 4 p.m. today and I use one extra tomorrow, zero. My bill would be zero. I used one, I gave them one, even footing, which is ideal and awesome. But I've heard from a lot of viewers that they don't get that. I bet you the gentleman who mentioned he has 10 cents billing I bet you if his net energy metering, he would not get 10 cents when he gave one to them. So the way they get around this is utility goes, well, wait a minute. We don't pay the power plant 10 cents to sell it to you for 10 cents. We pay the power plant 3 cents and we sell it to you for 10 cents, right? So if you want to give us electricity, we'll give you the wholesale price, which is 3 cents, which means now you make 3 kilowatts one day and you send it to the grid, and they'll say, okay, we'll give you a credit of 9 cents. And then tomorrow you use 1 kilowatt, we'll bill you 10 cents and you actually still owe them a penny. So these are the kinds of questions that you should probably ask your grid, your utility company about before you even go solar. Call them up and say, hey, I'm thinking about going solar. Break it down for me. How does it work? Do I get a 1-to-1? I use one, I send one, 0? Or is it like wholesale and retail pricing? How does it work? And get that answer first up front, because that'll really, otherwise if you get a huge system and you're just sending them electricity at the high solar times, it might not even be worth it for you. I've even heard of some utilities that won't give you any credit at all. So it's literally pointless to do it.
They're out there. And not only that, but there's another question that I would be asking my utility if I was installing solar is, are there levels, if there is a utility net metering agreement that is favorable, are there levels of people that join that net energy metering agreement where then they reduce it to the next tier down, right? Nevada Energy is a really good example of that, where I believe they're in the mid 80s. Excuse me, their current rate for net energy metering is that they're giving you about 85% of the value of that kilowatt hour. So if they were charging you 10 cents, they're giving you 8.5 cents, which you should leave some money on the table. But if you're using a lot of electricity, it may still make some sense for you, right? So ask your utility if there are any caps, is what I should have been saying, caps to the net metering number of people that could join that particular agreement. And if there are, where are you in that cap? Or in other words, is it about to be filled where it's going to bump down to the next tier, which is less favorable? And also, if you find out that there are caps, ask the sales company that's putting together your quotes where they see you going into that net metering agreement. Because a lot of times, and we see this often in Nevada, where we bring it to the homeowner's attention and they tell us, oh, well, nobody else has said this and I've already got several other quotes. Yeah, well, the other company was just trying to make a sale. I'm worried more about what you have to say about drone quote post-sale than even making the sale, because if I'm putting you in a position where you have something negative to say, it's really detrimental to our company. So I'm going to make sure that our staff is very straightforward with you and gives you the information that you need up front so that you make a decision based on accurate data or accurate knowledge.
Very well said. Really quickly, Shiblu K had asked a couple of times about Tesla solar. So first of all, Tesla doesn't make solar panels. So if you have a Tesla system, they're buying, as you mentioned, probably from QCell or some company, and they install them. So they're just an installer like any other installer. They've got good prices, but based on where you live, there could be a huge backlog. They might not have a lot of people trained there yet. So you might take a little bit of it might be cheaper, but it might be more painful in terms of the planning and the organization of it all. But Tesla is a fantastic option for sure. Then there is the Powerwall, which is, he called it the power bank. So yeah, it's a battery bank. It's a power storage system called the Powerwall. And he also asked, is it better to keep it inside or outside? So I live in San Diego where it never gets very cold. Like the coldest point of the year is still above freezing. So it'll never freeze pretty much here. So for that reason, I have it outside, because if I had it inside, I'd lose storage, like shelving space in my garage. I have this huge shelving wall, and I'd have to give it up if I wanted to have the Powerwall inside. So I was like, no, put it out there. Doesn't matter to me. But if you live in a place where it's really cold or it gets really hot, like really, not San Diego, then maybe put it inside your garage. That way you have a little more protection. You don't want these batteries to be, at negative 20 degrees if you live like in Canada or like Chicago or something. You don't want them to get too cold. So I would put them on the inside. So it'll depend really on where you live and how that works. Also, there was Ossuary Crawford says, if there's too much electricity during the day, why don't they make hydrogen with the excess? I think that's exactly what's going to start happening. People need to start getting hip to the fact that even if you have too much solar and not enough battery storage, there's no such thing as a bad situation with having too much solar generation. Take that solar generation. You're exactly right. Maybe electrolysis, hydrogen from electrolysis isn't the most efficient method. But if you have too much excess electricity, do that. Store hydrogen and start selling hydrogen to people for refilling stations that The reason why we don't do that currently is there's no demand for hydrogen. We have like 200 Toyota Mirais, and
Yeah, I was about to say.
there's no demand for it. But if that changed, like if we had freight trucks or barges and boats that needed hydrogen, they would start doing it. So I think the day when I think that'll happen probably the next couple of years.
That's funny. You mentioned the Toyota Mirais. I was reading a story about the owners of that vehicle having pretty much bricks because there aren't enough stations to fill up their vehicle. So good point on that question he mentioned, or that comment.
Yeah, when I've always said like the free market, and this is why I hate when I hear stories about like it's illegal to do this. Like, don't do that. The government should not tell people like it's illegal to not be connected to the grid. That's like you're forcing someone to be a customer. That's not freedom. But I've always said the free market, when there's a vacuum, if there's a need for something, like, oh man, we have so much hydrogen usage. I wish there was more. People will get in. Like when there's a vacuum, people will fill it. There will be companies that do that. So really, it's just kind of a chicken or the egg thing where we have to start to use it more frequently. I think that will be happening first in Japan. Japan, I think, is all in on hydrogen. So they're probably going to be the country that kind of sets the standard for how to generate it and use it in more applications.
And the hydrogen waste product will quench your thirst.
What's that?
The hydrogen waste product will quench your thirst because it makes water.
Yeah, and speaking of kind of emergency preparedness and stuff, I'll put a link to the live stream later, but our friend Ben Sullins has done a video where he bought this product from a company. It looks like a solar panel. It's like a big panel that they install on your roof, and it'll pull out the water from the air and send it down into a bottle, like purified water out of the air. And he was saying he makes like a couple of liters a day. So even if you had electricity, even if you had a power outage, there's no natural gas, there's no electricity, there's a storm. As long as the sun is shining, he has water, he has electricity, and everything, which is really cool. I want to do a future episode on that, but yeah, there's some really cool breakthroughs happening. I think it's still expensive at this point, but pretty cool. Yeah, there's a lot of different ways things we could do with the extra solar generation. Let's see if there's some other good questions. Okay, so Eric has mentioned a couple times. Does a Tesla solar glass roof set off the peel and stick membrane, thus keeping the air moving to cool the panels and roof?
That's a good question. I mean, just based on the Tesla Powerwall roofs that I've seen installed, I don't see there being a lot of airflow to, mitigate the loss of efficiency. Now, granted, this is coming from a dude that's 5'6", so he can't really see roofs very well, right? Because I'm not on it. That is a really good question. I don't have an answer for it, but that's something that I often discuss with homeowners because, they see these solar panels with skirts around them. And I tell people, look, it may look aesthetically more pleasing, but you're losing efficiency. You want to have as much airflow to reduce the heat on the panels because the misconception is that the solar panels are being heated and that's creating electricity. And, I would imagine most viewers know that that's not the case. So you want to have airflow underneath those panels. And I don't know the answer to Eric's question, I think you mentioned, but that is a really good point. I'm sure they've thought that through, though.
Yeah, so the solar glass roof, I don't think there's much in the way of ventilation underneath it. But the ridge and vent system, the overall roofing system is well designed for a good ventilation to keep your attic cool. And the fact that the entire roof is like a radiant barrier means your attic is going to be wildly cooler than normal. And also in the winter, the opposite. It'll be warmer than normal because radiant heat is blocked in either direction. But yeah, as far as the exact question, you remember, Eric, remember I talked to Mo, who was the installer for Good Faith Energy in Texas. Send me a message. I can ask him that question and give you a better idea. But yeah, not exactly sure. It's funny to see how wildly varying people's electricity prices are. I always find that fascinating. There's like Hawaii, New York, California, and then there's people who are like, I pay 9 cents all day, every day, one tier, and I use 2,000 kilowatt hours a month. And, it costs $200.
You just brought up a really good point. And I'm going to tie it back to the batteries in regards to how much electricity people use. So I live in a state where the cost of electricity is 8 cents. it's 8 cents, and there's tier 2, which is a whopping 9 cents. So I use a lot of electricity in my home, and a lot of times when people think about storage, they think, okay, well, I use electricity. If I have a battery, I'm good. But the thing is that the battery has a capacity of 13 kilowatt hours if we're talking about a Tesla Powerwall, and you're not using, you don't have access to all 13 kilowatt hours. You have access to a little bit less than that. That's the depth of discharge that we were talking about earlier. So you have to understand, as the homeowner, what is the total volume of electricity that I'm using for the year. If I'm using, on average of, I don't know, 2,000 kilowatt hours a month, it's going to be difficult for your battery to keep up with that amount of electricity. So you're not going to have a battery. If you do install batteries, you're going to have batteries, plural.
Right.
And also you're going to want to make sure that you're tying those batteries to breakers that aren't going to draw them down, in a brief amount of time. So the amount of electricity you use and where you're using that electricity is super important relative to your meeting your expectations. So that's something that your company that's helping you, or if it's us, Drone Quote, will help you figure out how to meet expectations with reality so that you are left with the feeling of, I got my money's worth. And that's super important. And unfortunately, in most cases, people don't realize that they did or did not get their money's worth well after the system's been installed and operational.
Yeah, good point. There was one question I had from viewers earlier when I had a little poll, which was about the span. Are you familiar with that smart meter?
The smart meter is very prevalent in San Diego.
No, sorry, the smart like electric, like the junction box, like your main house circuit breaker, the smart breaker.
Span. No, I'm not.
No? So
no.
Span is, I forget what it's a smart access panel or something like that. But it's it's like a Wi-Fi enabled smart device where you could, on your little on your smartphone, you could sit there and like turn on and turn off breakers for your house.
What?
And you can monitor the energy usage of each circuit in your house, right? Obviously, because it's built in. Yeah. So again, Ben Sullins, if most of you guys are probably familiar with Ben Sullins' channel, he has one installed and he's made a video about it. But it's pretty cutting edge tech right now. I'd imagine that in the next couple of years it'll be more accessible. But yeah, they've taken your entire utility panel and made that entire thing smart. So there's some cool things that you can do with that, right? Like if you're going on vacation, you can just like turn off breakers. You can see if there's like excessive usage from one circuit in your house, and you realize, oh man, I left the blow dryer on, or the hair straightener, the hair curling iron. In the case
did you leave your hair straightener on, Ricky?
Yeah, I do it all the time. It's a huge problem for me. But yeah, there's some really cool stuff in that realm. I think they're still pretty expensive, but as far as installation costs and stuff, I mean, getting one of these panels installed is probably going to cost you $2,000. That's right, Eric. But there's some cool benefits. Again, it's all about nerding out on data. If you're the kind of person who nerds out on data, that thing would be wildly interesting to you. And if you're not, you wouldn't care at all about it. So that's the way I would put it at this point.
And then what you just mentioned right now on a price for a panel upgrade, a standard panel that's not a smart panel, as you mentioned, is going to set you back roughly about $2,500 for those people watching. Roughly, assuming that there aren't any, digging costs or, surprises like moving it to a different location or significant stucco repair or, other things.
Exactly. People are proposing different options of what to do with excess solar energy. For one, they're saying like, compress gas during the day and release it at night. People have said you should, mine Bitcoin. It's actually a great idea. I think the reason why people aren't doing that is because you can't get your hands on computer parts, like graphics cards and stuff are wildly out of stock. I had an email notification at a website to tell me when they have the new NVIDIA RTX 3090 in stock. It's been 6 months and there's nothing.
Jeez.
And
there's a significant chip shortage just across the board, right? If I'm watching the news correctly, it's really having an impact on auto manufacturers, from what I was reading.
Yeah, exactly. It's a crazy thing. But I am planning a video on the future of like mechanical energy storage. We always think of batteries. We think about like or chemical batteries, I should say, like a lithium ion battery. But there's a lot of ways you can store energy. You could pump water up a hill and roll it back down, like hydropower, right? We've done
That's
that, and we
right.
do that to some level. But there's,
Yeah.
it's then there's like a flywheel. You could just take a big heavy mass and have it, like when you have excess energy, use it to spin it up and overcome all that inertia. And then now that it's spinning up, when you need extra power, you can flip it around and run as a generator and use that extra angular momentum to power whatever you need. There's also things like you could just take like a huge amount of springs and compress them with extra energy, and then when you need it, you can have it release. Really, it just comes down to increasing like kinetic or potential. In the case of water, it'd be potential energy. In the case of springs, like you take potential energy from the kinetic energy. There's different ways to do it, and I'm going to do an entire episode about this because I think it's wildly fascinating. But Bitcoin mining, as cool as I think it would be, I don't think is going to happen just because of the cost of hardware for that.
I like the idea of the water. I know that that's one of the biggest batteries is that, as we would think of batteries, is a lake. I think it was somewhere in, I don't remember if it was California or New York, but they move electricity, they move the water up with electricity and they move it down to generate electricity. And I think they'd done this around the cost of electricity around different times of the day. I don't know, an NPR story I heard a while back.
Yeah. Compressed air batteries, gravity batteries, liquid air batteries. There's all kinds of new innovations and breakthroughs. When you don't need to be overly energy dense, I think there's a lot of options for storing that energy. Because I want us to kind of think of it like that. We have been talking about going solar. We talk about getting panels, generating electricity. We've gotten really good at that. We all have roofs. The panel prices have come down so much. The rebate is back. It's a good time to buy solar. The thing now is to think. I love what my viewers said about I'm going to take this year to get solar, take the tax credit, and earmark that to put that toward getting a battery the following year. That's a really cool idea. But we need to store it as well.
That's along the lines of what I suggest to people when I have the pleasure of discussing, the benefits of solar, and that is, I've always seen solar as in a weird way of kind of like a money generating machine, because it helps you avoid a cost that you would otherwise spend money on, right? So if you're able to take that money that you're saving, let's say you save $150 a month on electricity because you installed solar, and you put those $150 a month towards buying down debt that you may have or putting it into an interest yielding account, with compound interest, that's just the possibilities that solar or saving on electricity open for you when you do take advantage of them in an efficient manner are great. And you could turn those savings into a lot more money by utilizing that money somewhere else. And that's one of the things that I personally love about solar. Don't get me wrong. I love the green aspect to it, and I love how it'll make you energy independent. But when I talk about the green aspect, the green I'm talking about has a Benjamin Franklin on it, right? So,
right. No, I think to your point, I've always said, when you win on economics, that's when you have that moment of like mass adoption. You have to win on economics, and solar really is there at this point. There was a question from Brian A. If you have the same square footage of solar roof tiles, I'm thinking the solar glass roof from Tesla, versus that same amount of space for the solar panels, which will win? The solar panels are more efficient. So from what I read, with Tesla solar glass roof, the efficiency is actually lower, but because the entire roof could potentially be generating electricity, it's again the efficiency isn't so important. It's really about you have this much roof space, and I want to produce 6 kilowatts or something like that, and then you can size the number of producing versus non-producing panels. But the panels are more efficient right now.
They are, and then you're also paying a lot less for them. So by that measure, it's another degree of efficiency you get out of regular solar panels. The only drawback is the aesthetics to some people.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Dolo says solar worth it in Florida, and I would say really it comes down to, after what happened in Texas, I think having preparedness, like maybe not being like a doomsday prepper, but being a prepper. I saw a tweet I loved. He said, after what happened in Florida, the person said, "New rule: no one can ever make fun of preppers ever again." And I hit like on that one. I was like, you know what? People make fun of people who go too far with this, maybe, but the reality is being prepared is always in style, and that's the way I look at this. So if you're happy to know that there's some outside force providing you electricity, and you're okay to trust them with that, fine. If you're kind of if you're a control freak and you want to have your own generation on your own house, then solar makes sense anywhere. But if it's for the economic reasons, then that's different. I think Florida has very cheap electricity prices, for example, and so for
They
that
do.
reason, um,
Well, we've sold a few systems in Florida, and although they do have a lower cost of electricity, they also have uh, they also have you're competing with their own, they being their utility, their own energy farms, and so you definitely have the option to buy renewable energy from the utility without having to install solar. I personally think that, if you can have that energy independence, it's going to be of benefit to you. And I've yet to meet anybody in my lifetime that has been prepared for something that regretted being prepared. Right. So having, well, it's true, right?
man,
So
I
if
really
you
regret
are
having electricity when.
when nobody else had it. But giving yourself the ability to be independent of the utility, there's just a feeling to it that I found when I installed solar in my home that definitely gave me a sense of self-reliance. And that to me is a big part of the value, right? I can't quantify that in dollars and cents, but knowing that the electricity coming out of my roof is my own electricity generated through my own means, there's a lot to be said about that.
Yeah, well said. There's some questions about the hurricane resistance. I don't know. Have you dealt with installations in heavy hurricane prone areas like Florida?
We have, but we haven't had any homeowners call us back and tell us, "Hey, my panels flew away."
Right.
So the same thing that I was mentioning to you guys earlier about having airflow underneath the panels will be a detriment if you have significantly high winds, and it'll also come down to how the panels were installed. So I'll mention this here in regards to the cost of a system and the quality of insulation. That you can have good, cheap, and fast, but you can't have all three, as you've heard, right?
Right.
So if you want a quality insulation, you sometimes will pay a little bit more for it, or it'll come from a company that has a longer standing and a better reputation than some other companies. But to answer your question, have we had any issues with the wind? We have not, but they're not unlikely in a place like Florida. And the thing about those panels is that if you have enough airflow underneath them, the panels are pretty big. They're about 3.5 feet by 5 feet roughly, and they'll create a lot of lift if you get enough wind underneath them. So, I mean, it's definitely a potential for some issues
So
depending on how it's installed.
yeah, I remember when I was getting my patio installed. There's certain area like local building codes that require certain things. Like, you use these hurricane ties that prevent you from having like you mentioned air come from underneath and treat your patio or your solar panel as a sail and pick up and lift it. So we had to follow the codes for San Diego. We don't have hurricanes here, but we had to follow all the building codes for that to happen. I'm curious. I'm sure when it comes to solar in Florida, things are different. Like maybe the rise off the roof, to your point, is lower. Maybe you do the skirts, which you mentioned earlier. Maybe that's a good idea that way you don't have wind coming underneath and lifting up on these panels. There's probably things to do. But I remember one of my colleagues when I forget the name of the hurricane in Florida like 2-3 years ago. When that came through, they had damage to their roof, like tiles came off, and they had to
Mm-hmm.
have someone come in and fix them. So I think you just generally have concerns when it comes to hurricanes, and hopefully there's the requirements and stuff of how to install them, maybe the strength of the roof mounting system. All that stuff is just more expensive to do in Florida for that reason that you're protected. But um, it's the same kind of question I've gotten about hail. Typically, these panels are, it's a tempered glass. They should be pretty resilient. Tesla solar glass roof or solar panels or whatever you get, they should have a good hail rating. But again, you might have a baseball-sized hail event that you can't prepare for, the kind of event
Right.
that will damage even normal roofs and stuff. So there's probably a
So
little bit of concern there, but that's what home insurance is for, right?
That's right. And I will add to damage to the conversation in regards to damage to solar panels. My son, I think he threw a rock. Actually, you know what it was? I made him a slingshot. That's where I messed up. I made my son a slingshot, and he launched a rock into the sky, and it landed on our solar panel, and it shattered the panel. So one panel was completely shattered. That you could see the impact, and then everywhere where it's spider webbed throughout the entire panel. And I lost about 8% efficiency on that solar panel. But when I saw how much electricity I was still generating, I was like, I'm not going to pay for a whole new panel. This thing's still producing power. And in the big picture,
Yeah,
only this one panel was messed up. So it'll continue to produce a significant amount of power overall. So they are resilient.
they really. I had a similar experience as well. I had one of my panels that I've replaced, or just my experiment panels, if you will, that I've been messing with. It had shattered and was broken, and the output was not. It was much more than 8%, but it was maybe like 25% reduction in output. But it just kept on plugging and just making electricity. They're shockingly resilient. But obviously, if that happens, I think you'd probably want to replace it. But yeah, even if you didn't, it would be making you electricity.
Yeah, I would go as far as to say that, De Beers says that diamonds are forever, right?
Yeah,
And Wu Tang is forever, as we know, well, without a question.
especially that
Now
album.
yeah, I would definitely add solar panels as almost being forever, because they are very resilient and they do produce long into the future.
And I think I told you earlier, my first 5 panels, and I love these things. Even though I've thought about, I can upgrade them now and make more electricity. I'm not going to, because I want to make a video 10 years from now and say my panels turned 20 and keep covering it. But 10 years later, they are up there. They have never missed a beat. They continue to make power. They don't need me to. I don't have to worry about them at all. I lose track of the day. They just keep on trucking. It's such a great investment. I really do think they paid for themselves on year 8.5, like about 8.7 years, I think was my calculation. They had paid for themselves, and that was based on my installing them in 2010. I had a 1.2 kilowatt system in 2010. I could have had a 4 kilowatt system for the same price in 2021. So
Yeah.
that just shows you how far we've come. But even then, all that said, I've been through 2 refrigerators. I've been through 4 cars. I got married. I have 2 kids. My whole life has changed. But the only 2 constants in my life have been I have the same house and I have the solar panels. I know it sounds crazy, but I cannot underemphasize this, because there's a lot of people who kind of like the flyby people who come in and watch a video of mine and say, "Oh, those panels will be dead in 5 years." Like, you have no idea how wrong you are. They are
Yeah.
wildly efficient and wildly durable.
Man, it's funny that you put it that way. They're like that. Your solar panels lasted longer than my first marriage, man.
Well, I didn't want to go there, but I mean, the point
Hey,
is,
I'll go there. It's all good.
I've had like 5 cars, four cars in that time. Yeah, I mean, how many computers have I gone through? How many monitors or TVs, or and none of this stuff. People never say, "Oh, that computer's stupid. You're gonna get rid of it in 5 years." But we think about solar that way, but it's the opposite, man. Like, they're just, and what else can just be out in the sun without worry and just keep on working? If you ever put like a t-shirt out in the sun for a day, it'll
Yeah,
get
it's all.
bleach. It'll be
Yep.
completely destroyed. Ultraviolet light is a nightmare. It destroys everything. Um, unless plants evolve to handle it, or we have plastic, and even plastic, only like UV rated exterior grade plastic can withstand. It's brutally rough, but panels
Yep.
panels are reliable. Um, the one thing I'll say too is, remember about the warranty stuff. If you're the kind of person who, for me, really the warranty was more like, oh, I have a warranty. I never even thought to worry about it. So if it's more of a peace of mind thing, it's not a big deal. But if you're the kind of person who, the minute anything's up, you're calling for the warranty stuff, go with a better name brand for the panels and go with a bigger name company, because you don't want to have that feeling of, well, that sucks. That company's no longer operating and I can't get my warranty work done. Also, can you give us a little information about, because I've gotten this question before, about your insurance. So like, for example, I got solar panels. My house now has $20,000 more worth of stuff. Should my insurance go up, Will my insurance cover it? How does that work?
Yeah. So when I installed solar, I have USAA homeowners insurance, and I don't remember the exact number off the top of my head, but it was a very negligible number. But to answer your question directly, my insurance did go up. I don't recall. It was such an insignificant number that I don't recall the amount by which it went up. But it did definitely it did go up. And had I filed an insurance claim, I would have paid the deductible. That's why when my son broke that panel, I was like, yeah, I'm not gonna file an insurance claim. It's not worth it. But you will see a slight increase in your insurance unless you opt for a PPA, a power purchase agreement, because the insurance is going to be carried by the holder of that note.
Gotcha. Does anybody have any questions? There's good conversations about energy storage and kind of like these are people like us who nerd out about this. Clearly, I can just tell from the comments that there's people who think about this a lot. There was a question about heat exchangers, maybe some heat pumps and stuff. So I think part of the question was, if you've ever heard of a solar panel, actually, there's probably two kinds you've probably heard of. One is a photovoltaic, which is what we're talking about, where sunlight hits it, moves photons, and you're able to collect the electricity from that and produce electricity. The other thing is thermal heating, like a hot water heater. So you have
Yep.
this kind of black, what looks like a ribbon on your roof, and water is passed through like a coil system, and the sun is hitting it and heating up that water. So that way the inlet temperature of the water might have been 60 degrees Fahrenheit, but the outlet temperature is 120 degrees or something. It depends on how hot the sun is and stuff. That's a really great passive way to heat pools, or even like a tankless, water heater. Now, there's potentially, I guess, a way you could combine both into one panel. So you have like a heat exchanger to have like passive heating, which will then cool off the panels and make them more efficient. So the heat you collect in this water system inside the panel underneath, and on top you have photovoltaic. So there's potentially a way to combine the two. Although
that exists. I've seen a company that does that, but there's now a moving substance through those panels, and the connectivity becomes an issue. So
if it leaks or something.
Yes, these solar panels that you're describing for thermal solar panels for pools is a really good example. They have a lifespan of about 10 to 15 years because the sun wears down the plastics and then leaks start to happen. So the complexity with these PV photovoltaic / heating panels is that you have the connectivity issue between the panels, and you have leaks of water. In theory, it sounds like a really cool concept because you are increasing efficiency of the solar panels, but they're not big for a reason. I don't even know the name of the company. I don't remember them.
Yeah, I mean and also just remember that the water heating power is wildly reduced because of the panel on top of it. So these systems, like the improvements that they make for the complexity they add, it was kind of like the solar tracking mechanical stuff. It's not worth the extra probably headache of it all, and leaking fixtures and the plumbing and all that. So that's probably why. Somebody also mentioned a bifacial panel earlier. I don't remember who the gentleman was. So this is the panel that has solar panels on the bottom as well, right?
Yeah, so these panels they actually look really sleek. I like the bifacial solar panels, especially if you're putting them on a white or very light colored roof, because you have a lot of reflection of light to get the underneath section of the panel. But they're frameless panels typically. They are it's just glass around the panels rather than an aluminum frame. And you do pick up an efficiency increase because of the fact that you have that underneath electricity being generated. They're not as common, and they do have special use applications, typically on commercial buildings where the roofs tend to be white. But if you have where I've seen them used in a residential manner is when it comes to like a patio structure.
Yeah, exactly.
And you put and they look so nice. It really does.
Yeah. So bifacial just means you have the panels on top, like all panels, but then you have panels on the bottom. So clearly they're in different strings because the top is going to be producing most of it. But the bottom now can get any kind of reflected sunlight from, like you mentioned, a patio structure. And that's where I've seen them used. Commercially, imagine if you have like a big carport or something, you use these, and some level of light is going to hit the floor and bounce, and that they can collect on the bottom side and add another 20% or something of efficiency. So very cool.
It's actually the same cell.
Concept.
it's the same cell on the front and the bottom, or the
Right.
top and the bottom, and that's why they're glass framed, so that you don't have a back sheet. Because, like, for example, SunPower has a very efficient back sheet, but you lose all that upside, or
Right.
the downside electricity.
It's a very good point. That's really less common. Like I mentioned, there's also the shade resistant panels from a company. I forget the name of the company now. But those are all kind of more specialty. Odds are the panels you get are going to just be pretty traditional, especially because that's what's mass produced and more widely available. And yeah, there's talks about like heat pumps and stuff. I just want to quickly mention our next video is going to be on why heat pumps will be the future of home heating. So definitely subscribe and stay tuned for that. We'll talk a little bit about the efficiency gains of going that route. There are some definitely holistic kind of systems that we can be thinking about. Anything that makes extra heat could be used to heat something usefully, and and vice versa. So I mean, there's a lot of like synergy in a home that isn't really captured, and that's where I think people have made kind of conjecture that Tesla might do some sort of like an HVAC system, which maybe ties all that together and takes like the waste heat from this and uses it to heat a hot water heater, and and kind of closes the loop of all that heat motion and stuff. So nothing yet they've announced, but I think Elon is the kind of nerd that would love to tackle a problem like that. So it's probably just a matter of time. So Justin asks, when and how will the broader solar PV market get to Tesla's $2 per watt price? For most areas outside of California, payback is still more than 10 years.
So what I think Tesla has done really well, and I'll give some level of credit to Drone Quote because we're moving in that direction as well, is that they've automated or removed the salesperson as much as possible from the equation, and also their customer acquisition cost is extremely low because they have this business with their vehicles, right? And batteries as well, I guess you could say, but mainly vehicles, where they have a customer that purchased their vehicle, and now they could offer them additional products, and without having to market to that customer to purchase their solar panels, there's a significant savings there. The other thing that they've done is they've allowed the homeowner a lot of autonomy in building their quotes out on their website. And that's where I was mentioning earlier, Drone Quote's moving in that direction as well. We released a tool that's called What's My Price, the play on words there being watts, of course, that allows the homeowner to build out their own quote and remove the salesperson more from the transaction. That does two things. That allows you to get your quotes in a quicker manner and allows you to build them to your liking without having to wait on anybody. And it also removes the salesperson's time in building out that quote for you. In most companies, actually, I would say 98% of solar companies out there that are giving you quotes, when you're talking to the salesperson and they're going back and forth on building their quotes, it's taking up their time that they're not spending out selling a system with another party. So by removing the salesperson as much as possible from the equation, you're able to reduce the price. Tesla's done that very well, and they've also increased customer autonomy with the additional benefit of having the customer acquisition cost being lower for them. So when the solar industry as a whole figures this out to a better degree, you're going to see the cost of solar going down, because as it stands today, the cost of components is really about as low as it's going to get. I can't imagine it going down too much more. Your costs are coming from acquiring the customer and from the salesperson being involved in the middle.
Yeah, really good point. And when you use a service like Tesla and Drone Quote, is why I partnered with you guys, you remove some of that overhead. It's a shame if you were a solar salesman. I get that. Not everyone wins in transitions of technology, but in the case of solar prices, you can't compete with when you don't have to pay that extra overhead. Also, there's differences in the size of companies and how much overhead there is there, and how many different people are supported by the work of these companies. So that's going to be there. Here's a quick question for you, by the way, before we switch gears. Sar Yogev says, you said that panels barely required cleaning. How does that work with a more desert-like climate, like Arizona, for example, with more sand and way less rain to clean it? What have you found?
So in those cases, it would be in your best interest that you pay attention to your monitoring. One, so you look at your monitoring on your mobile device, and you could get a feel, and I'm sure you would agree to this, after you've had the system for a year, what time of year is going to be better for you, right? You mentioned earlier on in our conversation. So in a place like Arizona, where there is less rain and more dust being kicked up from what have you, it would be in your best interest to schedule some sort of cleaning. Now the challenge is, if you have a roof that's inaccessible or hard to access, you're going to be paying somebody for that cleaning. So now what would have been your savings on electricity, you're paying somebody to clean the roof, or excuse me, clean the panels, and that's reducing your monetary benefit. So I think that in a place like Arizona or Texas, or where there's a lot more dust or debris, if you're underneath a tree, that's why I don't like trees as well, not only the shade, but the debris from the trees, you're going to have to clean your panels more, and that's going to come at a cost either of your time or your money.
Yeah, that's a good point. One thing I do, and this might not be possible if you have a bigger house, if you take your garden hose with a nice high pressure nozzle on it and just get to a position where you can like point up on your panels and just wash them a little bit. That alone, I mean, that does most of the job. You're not going to get like more fine stuff and like bird poop and stuff like that's not going to come off probably, but you'll get a lot of that dirt layer right off of there. So if you have a 2-story house, that might be trickier, but the easiest way I think would be to do that, because paying someone to clean the panels, that eats into your savings really quickly. Do most people ever clean them? I actually want to say that most people probably never have cleaned their panels. Just leave them up there and let the rains, whenever they come, wash them. And
it's actually, with the exception of knowing that you're not paying as much for electricity, it's easy to forget you have solar.
Yeah.
Because I mean, especially in your case, right? You come home and you don't pull up to your driveway and you don't see panels. Somebody that may see panels regularly, they'll okay, I have solar, I can see them there. But even then, you kind of get used to it, and you don't think about them. So most people don't clean their panels for that reason.
All right, this is a cool question I think you'll like. Cameron Sowers says, for Sinuway from Drone Quote, are there any off-the-wall requests you've been able to accommodate?
Off-the-wall requests. I mean, the most recent one that comes to mind is so when Drone Quote helps a homeowner buy solar, we do a before and after drone survey, right? Before the system's installed, we get measurements with the drone of shade and the physical roof space. And then we do a post-installation survey to make sure that no tiles are cracked, or that the system was installed the way it should have been installed. And oftentimes, well, I shouldn't say oftentimes, sometimes we catch things. But I've had a request just recently where somebody called us back over a year and said, hey, can you fly the drone over my roof again? I just want to make sure the panels are good. I thought that was a little strange because we'd already shown them that they were, good to go. And that's the only thing that's coming to mind off the wall requests.
I remember there was a gentleman who emailed you who wanted like panels installed in a weird location, like hundreds of meters from his house or something. Remember that one? There's probably been a couple.
I speak to so many different people. Yeah, no, I don't remember them. But you don't want to install your panels too far away from where you're going to be metering that electricity, because there's a loss over a significant distance. But now, to answer the question more directly, other than this one example I just gave you, I can't think of another off-the-wall request that comes to mind.
But I mean, the point is, if somebody had questions or had like a special need, you'd sit down with them, understand the nature of it, and give them advice on how best to proceed. That really is what people are looking for. And this is part of why, you've been written a lot. I remember we did a video a year ago, and I want to make it a yearly tradition that we should talk every year. And I know people emailed you because I saw the comments. There was tons of people with like unique questions for you, and thank you for fielding them, because part of it is, first of all, like there's just these weird questions that people have, and maybe they're like a little, they don't know how to phrase it right, or they don't know quite the question to ask. But if you can get people get started, like, hey, look, here's kind of the general basics. That's what we've been doing today. Understand if it's right for you, like how much you pay for electricity. Do you own your house? Do you, are you going to live there for a long time? Are home values high where you live, or all this kind of stuff. Once you have that, second, your particular questions, if you have somebody who can answer them, you just feel so much better. And that's where you've come in, and I really appreciate you always doing that. Every time somebody has a question about solar, I go, hey, I'm CCing Sinuway. He'll take care of you. Thank you. And I appreciate you always doing that.
Yeah. Well, it's our pleasure. I want to make sure that we are offering value to people, even if it means that, we're not going to be doing business together. That's okay, because we're not going to win every single opportunity, or not every single contact is going to be an opportunity. But I do make it a point to make ourselves available, whether it's myself or anybody else on staff. Maybe Riley, maybe Tara. Alina is probably the first point of contact that viewers will come into contact with. She's who typically answers the phones. But it's our responsibility between our staff to make sure that we are always being of service to people that reach out to us, even if there is no business to be done. Because at the end of the day, I want to make sure that I have not given anybody any opportunity to say anything negative about DroneQuote, only positive things. And that comes through, being available and doing the right thing.
Exactly. Let's see if there's any other questions. So we have 10 minutes left, guys, and thank you all of you for joining. If you guys have email, I'll put a link in the chat. Maybe I should do that. Should I? So email us there. I'll pin this to the chat. If you have any questions, like specific questions about going solar, email me at that address, and we'll pass it along to Sinuway or whatever we got to do. And you can ask questions and know there's no pressure. I have people who email me. There's this one guy who's emailed me for like a year and a half. I don't think he's ever bought solar. He just has all these questions about solar, and that's fine. That's fine.
Yeah.
I've always said I love solar. I love talking about it. I think it's one of those technologies that is transformative. It gives you a sense of power and control. I can make my own electricity. So happy to talk to people about that. But we have about 10 minutes left. So if there's any questions we can get to, I'm happy to do so while we have you. And there will be a follow-up episode where this is going to be a 2-hour kind of rambling. We had that little stumble in the middle. But we will do a 30 minute, like rapid, fast, like massively information dense video with Sinuway, where we'll answer all the questions of all the stuff that you got to know about going solar in 2021. So that video will come out maybe in a week or two as well.
Trying to think of any last minute value adds that I could add here.
Yeah, think of something, and we'll see if there's any questions. Dan says, going full-time RVing this year, 2,500 to 3,000 watts of solar. Wow, that's a lot for an RV. That's amazing.
It is.
And 13.5 kilowatt hours of lithium iron phosphate for storage. Dan, you've pretty much described my dream setup. I was shopping for RVs yesterday. I kid you not, because I have a deep desire to take the family and do like a 3 months on the road thing, get like a hotspot thing, have solar, have all that. The real challenge is I'd love to do it electric, but we just don't have, like, my Cybertruck isn't here yet. So maybe I'll wait until then and get a fifth wheel, or do an RV and maybe just live with a gas-powered RV for one last trip or something. I don't know. But I think that's really cool, Dan, and I'd love to hear more about that when you have more information. So Ian asks, will DroneQuote estimate for us here in Vermont? You guys operate in Vermont?
No, unfortunately, we do not. But that doesn't mean that I can't be of service to Ian. If he has any questions on the quotes that he has received, we've done that countless times. We will field any questions, especially in a manner where there's no dog in the fight, to give you the answers that you're looking for from a party that, well, there's no dog in the fight.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because part of the DroneQuote model is establishing connections, finding the best installers, working with people. So it takes some time. But I mean, tell me I'm not wrong, but you guys have grown your network massively since working with us, right? We've probably been giving you leads all around the place, right?
We have. So when we started working with you guys, that was in 2019. Yeah. That opened up the lead flow through you guys to an audience that involves just about every single state and even international people.
Right.
So it just goes to show, Ricky, how far your reach goes. We've had people from Canada is an easy country to name, but Germany, from Spain, from Australia, that came across us through Tubit. So I'm really fortunate that we were able to build this connection for that reason, but also, on a more personal level, you and I have become friends. We've hung out, so I appreciate that opportunity as well. So it's been great.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I appreciate you guys for being on here. This has been fun, and I think what we could probably do, Senor, is I get what I'm going to start to do from now on is I get questions about solar all the time, and I go, oh, that's a great question. I'm going to make a list, and when the list gets big enough, we'll have you back on. We'll talk and answer some of these questions. But it sounds like the audience here today is pretty savvy. They've got like Junker Zian has mentioned. He enjoyed the live stream, and he's clearly had solar for a long time, and he kind of understands the ins and outs of it. So there's probably a good mix of people, but there are some really good questions that I do get quite often. Cleaning is something that people have brought up in the past, and I will say most people never pay for cleaning. I have seen some trucks starting to roll around, like solar cleaning services, and I had to take a double take, like what? But I mentioned like a free market, right? When you have a need, businesses will pop up. If that's how it works. So that's good to know.
You know what? If I could ask, if I could do two things here real quick before we wrap up, Ricky. The first of which is shameless plug, right? Drone quote that I've mentioned us a few times throughout our conversation. But I would really like the feedback of the audience on a marketing approach that we took with this tool that we released. It's called What's My Price.
Is there a link I can put?
I should know this off the top of my head. There's a YouTube video that we put out. If you type in What's My Price.
Okay, I'll put a link to it.
Yeah, and that's actually where I'm going with the feedback. I'm not going to name any particular company names for the threat of lawsuit. But if you guys check out the What's My Price video and give me your feedback on that, I would really appreciate that, because we have a campaign around Glow. I'll leave it at that. And we have a few other videos that we're working to release. And I would like to get your guys' feedback to see.
Is there an email you want to share?
Yeah, you know what? info@dronequote.net. info@dronequote.net. And if you have questions for me specifically, that is not as general. Info would be like a general solar question, but drone quote, S Montoya @dronequote.net. If you have something specific for me, but otherwise, we have several people looking at the info email address, and it'll be responded to a little bit quicker. This is a live video, and I'm not at my office, and I won't be for the next couple of days. So I wouldn't be able to respond as quickly, potentially.
Yeah, don't worry. Yeah, exactly. And thank you for answering all the people who have emailed you with questions and stuff in the past. Junker mentions that, fire safety shutoffs and stuff in California. Yeah, I think we're starting to see the effects of some of the changes that are happening to our climate in different places. It manifests in different ways. Texas, horrible stuff happening. More hurricanes. We have more hurricanes than ever before. We don't have that in California. We have fires, and our fire seasons are going to get worse and worse, and it doesn't take much to be without power. And so we should probably start to be thinking about solar and batteries. And somebody mentioned before, if you have solar without batteries, you don't have power when the power goes down. You can't make electricity if it's shining, the sun is shining, it's the brightest day of the year, does not matter. Your house will be without power like everybody else. That's why I keep saying the 20s, the next 10 years, I want it to be about batteries, because solar is well in hand. We need to really figure out the storage part, and that's going to be crucial. Mm-hmm. And to your point, so I put a link up above. I'll pin the video. I can't pin two comments, I guess, but I can pin your video, and give him his feedback on his marketing campaign. So I think the comparison to the company will be clear. But what's my price?
Watts, like solar watts. W-A-T-T-S.
What's my price, or your what's?
Yeah, the What's My Price is a tool that we released.
So, one of the things people do, especially if you're a nerd and you're kind of figure out details, is you go, okay, what if I got more panels, but they were more efficient, or I got less panels and they're less, and you start to like change it around, you don't have to deal with a person. You got to keep calling, going, "Hey, John, could you change my order to this and tell me how much that costs?"
Yep.
That's no fun. So to your point about what Tesla's done, made it all online to make it easy to visualize. Sinua's done the same thing with Drone Quote, and the what's my price tool, Watts WATTS, what's my price tool, helps you to pick a system, resize it, look at how things are changing in real time. And it's a fascinating, fun, especially if you're a nerd way, to see how what if I got 2 more panels just to be more ready for the future? Because I want to get an electric car or something. You could do all that and have a good idea of the price of the system. And if you have that tool, it ties in nicely with you guys, and you guys are in sync with what the user is looking for.
Yep, and it's accurate to the home. So it's accurate to the orientation of your house. It's accurate to the amount of shade that's on your roof. It's accurate to the number of panels that actually fit on your roof. So you're getting numbers that are applicable to you, rather than just using a generic tool online that says this number of panels will produce this amount of electricity. That's not specific to your home. This is Watts My Price is.
Good point.
Listen, Ricky, believe it or not, Watts My Price was not trademarked. I almost passed out from the excitement when I saw that it wasn't
trademark it.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah. And wattsmyprice.com, we got it for $12, man.
You gotta love it. So Cheryl says, the cat's out of the bag. You're busted. Cheryl says, I hope Progressive Insurance isn't upset with you about their commercials. And then,
Cheryl.
This is really cool, because this tells you that Eric watched this video from a year ago. Eric Kessler mentions Sinue quote, solar and batteries are like PB&J. That was something you said a year ago in that video,
right?
Right. Yeah.
That's right.
So that's Eric's my man. Thank you, Eric. Exactly.
I appreciate you, Eric. I appreciate you.
Yeah. And if you have ideas, or I can mention, I have extra solar panels. I kind of want to build my own little battery. If you guys are interested in science experiments of kind of tackling some of these things, like I mentioned, put your panels westward facing. How would that look? Especially if you have time of use, how would westward-facing panels compare with just putting your traditional south-facing? And so if you have questions like that, let us know. We'll do more videos. I think it's time to wrap this up. Thank you guys all for watching. Sinue, a huge thank you. I know you're on travel. I think you're in a business center at the hotel where you're staying.
I am. You can tell. There's another computer back there.
But we made it work. And if you guys have questions and stuff, write to us. Put his emails there. I'll put it all into the live stream as well. And thank you. We will keep covering. Don't worry if you missed this or you have questions still. I love solar. We're going to talk more about it, and there'll be much more to come. Thank you guys so much for watching. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. It's Saturday morning, so best time of the day, right? You have the whole weekend to look forward to. So enjoy yourselves.
Easter weekend, yeah.
Yes. Happy Easter to all those who observe, and we'll catch you guys soon. Thank you again, Sinue. Appreciate you.